all black. Find your home.
We hit Black 11.
I hit Black 11. That's the dragon.
Welcome back to Water Hose Drinkers. Today is July 14th. It is a Monday. Today we're here with the voice of Georgia Southern Eagles, Danny Reed. First off, Danny, really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Josh, absolutely. Always to talk about the Eagles. You know that, man.
Yeah. So first question I got for you, not a serious question, joking, but how is it working with Terry Harvin?
How do you think it is? No, well, I've known Terry for close to 13 years, and he's gone from being at another school to a colleague that I was only seeing a few times a year when he was still living in Macon. And I just got started here when Chris Blair and I had that overlap year in 15. And even the first couple of years I took over doing all three sports, he was still living in Macon. And then he ended up getting the general manager job with Georgia Southern Sports Properties. So it went from hardly seeing him at all to seeing him every day, and you're broadcasting with your superior. Now I'm still play by play, so I'm still steering it, but it's definitely helped be more mindful that everything that is sold on the broadcast, the execution of the broadcast, it might seem like it falls on me to a degree, but it falls even more so on him because everything trickles down. So it's even more of a, hey, we really got to make sure we're tight, and we only have somewhere around 12 to hopefully 15 chances a year if it's football to make it the best that we can. So that's why when you hear it sound the way that it does, there's a lot that goes into it, but there's a lot of care for it while it's going on, and we take a lot of pride in that.
Yeah, I mean, I just love any chance I get to, give Terry a little hell. You know what I mean? So
It's easy. He brings it on. It's easy.
But anyway, for people who don't know you, kind of maybe give a little background on yourself and, your kind of path to Statesboro.
I grew up in Cumberland, Maryland, which is in the western part of the state. You can get to four different states in less than an hour. I'm about 2 hours south of Pittsburgh, which is ended up being halfway in between where I went to college. I can get to Baltimore, DC in about 2.5, depending on the traffic. But went to Catholic school from kindergarten through 12th grade. Always wanted to get into sports media, specifically doing play-by-play whenever I wasn't playing. If I was sitting on the bench or if I was just watching at another game, I would kind of call it to myself from the video games that I was playing, whether it was listening to John Madden or Pat Summerall, or when Al Michaels used to be the voice of the hardball baseball game. And I know we're going back a ways on that, but I just thought that that was the coolest thing in the world. And I had quite a few people in my life that were involved in it that helped get me even more involved in it. My government and history teacher in high school, a guy named Jim Zamias, was in the sports department for the local radio station, WCBC 1270 AM in Cumberland. And I got involved in the first place doing two main things. I did stats for high school football one year, and I also called Little League baseball games for 6 years while I was an assistant coach for the team that he managed. And we ended up winning a league championship the very last year that I did it. But it was a fun summer thing to make me realize that this was definitely what I wanted to do. Went to school for it at Waynesburg College, now Waynesburg University, just south of Pittsburgh. Graduated in '07. Spent time with the Hagerstown Suns, Charleston River Dogs. Met Terry through the Citadel and Chris Blair and Ryan Chambers and all of them in my 3 years there. Got back into minor league ball in Bowling Green, Kentucky in 2015. And then that summer, when I found out that Chris Blair was going to move on to LSU, I thought, what a great spot for someplace that I'd always admired. And I knew a little bit of the story. I didn't know the full thing, and I would end up learning the whole thing whenever I got down here. But I applied for it, ended up getting the job just before my just before my 30th birthday, moved down here after the season ended in September. First game was against the Citadel when I was on the sidelines for to a crowd that was 23,000 plus dominated. I still remember Matt Breida's long touchdown run that first game, but outside of that, a lot of it was a blur. And then Chris leaves for LSU that December. I take over full time with basketball, baseball, and then complete that first full revolution with football in 16. But it's been that way. I've been here 10 years. This is going to be my 10th doing football, but it'll be my 11th on basketball and baseball whenever those seasons get here. It goes fast, but there's been a lot of amazing things that have happened. We've seen the transfer portal, we've seen NIL, we've seen the house settlement. It seems like any day that you wake up or go in, something new is going to happen, and that's part of what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, and I mean, I've always been one of those fans to where if I'm not at, more so a football game, but I listen to a lot of baseball games just through the radio. I love listening to you guys. Just if I'm not at the game, I'm turning off this crappy ESPN Plus broadcast. Like I'm flipping on you guys. Like I've just it's just like religious to me. I gotta listen to the radio.
You've got such a there's a chemistry that we all have, and that's something that made me fall in love with Georgia Southern before I even got there. Hearing how Chris and Ryan, Frank, Russ, and Terry all work together, you could tell how they got along so well and that they were best friends, even though they weren't seeing each other a ton outside of football season. And when I got here, and Frank and Russ and Colin and were still around, I'm not messing with this. I might put my own sprinkle or my own style here and there, but I'm not going to mess with what works. Having the tailgate stage at football is so cool because you feel like you're a bigger part of the show with the Eagle Walk, Southern Pride, the team coming in, but people are coming over to you. Some of them are looking at it, wondering what we're doing if they've never seen the radio broadcast before. But to have special guests on, and then once we get in the stadium at Paulson, whenever the team runs out, it's just that a switch gets flipped and Terry's got 40 years worth of stories stockpiled that he can go to at any time. Nobody loves this place as much as he does. It takes everybody to make it work. And it might seem like it's, oh, well, there's a play, you call it, you just keep going. But everything has to work a certain way for us to sound the way that we do. And Terry's the head of it. I just happen to be the one that yells wings up whenever the Eagles score touchdowns. But it's been an amazing thing to see how that crew works so well, and to step in and not really skip a beat in the last 10 years has been something.
Yeah, you said, wings up, that's your classic touchdown call when we score a touchdown. Chris Blair had, put an Eagle six on it. He always said that. Obviously you got to put your own touch to things, but where did you the wings up thing kind of started? How did that become for you?
I gave proper credit to Barry Muncassi for cheerleading on this because I knew what I was going to say. I didn't plan on having a touchdown call, but we were on that first road trip to Idaho. This was the week after the Citadel game. And the only trip that Eagle football made to Moscow, Idaho in 2015. And we're on the sideline that Friday setting up before the next night's game. And I saw the sign and it said wings up. And I don't know if I had seen it before and it just didn't process. But I thought that'd be a really cool, quick thing. And I added the Eagle Nation. I knew what I was going to say right then, and I wouldn't get a chance to say it until a year later. And some people were saying, "Oh man, which touchdown call is going to be?" I never went in planning on having one, but it just seemed so perfect. It seemed right, and thankfully, over the last 10 years, we've had a lot of moments where you always hear it, but sometimes it gets cranked up a little bit if you're trying to win a game. Thank you, Kyle Van Treese and Ezra Archie in 2022 against App and against Nebraska that year.
And Marshall this year, this past
Oh, God. Yeah, Derwin twice, JMU that year, and Marshall last year. People, I think, have realized that something good is happening whenever they hear that. But whenever, whenever I'm straightened at the end of the game, if it's something exciting like that, you know that it's taken everything to get that, and then the volcano explodes whenever you get a moment like that.
Yeah, and I remember going back after the game and the Nebraska game and listening to the call. I think the school posted something, but that last touchdown, Van Treese runs it in the end zone, and at the end of the game, they missed that kick. You said something after they missed that kick, and Terry goes, I think he said, "Man, I love corn" or
I
something
love
like
corn.
that.
Yep.
But with Chris Blair, obviously he was at Georgia Southern for a long time. Is that kind of somebody that you immediately looked up to right when you got to Statesboro?
Thankfully, that first year when I got the Citadel job in 2011, I started listening to some other guys around the league because I didn't know a ton about the Southern Conference, a little bit here and there, and I knew a little bit about Georgia Southern. But when I got to the Citadel, I started when I was doing my own research and trying to figure, okay, what's Elon, what's Wofford, what's Chattanooga. I got to act like I know what I'm talking about. But whenever I came across Georgia Southern and Chris and Terry and Ryan, the way that it sounded, the way that they presented, I thought, okay, these guys got it together. So this is somebody I need to learn from. So I reached out to Chris fairly early. He helped me out with some technical things, equipment wise, because that's never really been a strong suit of mine. And when the Citadel visited in November, we had a chance to meet for the first time, and that was the game where Freedom didn't fly that day because it was too windy. And I think that that was one of the few times that he had never flown at Paulson. And it turned out to be a factor because the Citadel's driving late in the game down 14-12. Georgia Southern's number 4 in the country that day. And the Citadel had only won one time ever at Paulson. I'm thinking, okay, this is about to be a huge win. 37-yard field goal right hash. And the ball literally does this. I'm thinking the win before the game. No wonder Freedom didn't fly. It's headed right down the middle. Ball hooks right. Paulson goes nuts. And the only way that it was 14-12 is because Georgia Southern blocked extra points on both Citadel touchdowns in the first half. Otherwise, we might still be playing. Who knows? But that was the indication that Georgia Southern was special, and then catching up with Chris during basketball as well, because the Citadel and Georgia Southern would always play each other home and home. Baseball, getting to know Ryan Chambers and Chris Draper, we just hit it off. It clicked. We saw things the same way. We had the same kind of sense of humor. And then it's more than a decade later having a chance to be the head of the snake, and it's been awesome. It really has.
Yeah, and I mean, you've called games all over the country. You've been a lot of places, called a lot of games for different sports. But I feel like one of the unique things at the setup for Paulson is where you guys sit on top of the stadium. You're outside. I mean, you're listening to the whole fans outside, rain or shine, you're sitting out there too. But is that kind of one of the most unique, I guess it's, most unique places to call a football game?
It is, and it helps because I want to be able to feel what it's like for the people involved in the game because if I can't call it accurately. Now, that might mean if it's a cold game, for instance, the 2019 game in Boone, cold, blizzard conditions, snow globe, the wind, the snow, it's nuts, but we had to feel that you can hear in the call. If we're up there with windows down and 75 degrees, you're not going to believe that we're calling a game in a driving snowstorm. You got to be able to feel that. I need the wind. I need the cold on my skin as much as it might suck in the middle of it. That's how you need it in order to sell things like that. And as much rain as we've had at Paulson over the years, especially in 2019, where it seemed like every game was a monsoon, sometimes that water comes in and the our spotting charts get wet and the ink runs, but that way we can tell, look, folks, it's pouring here. If our windows are down and we're nice and comfortable, you're not going to believe we are where we are. So that's one of the things that makes Paulson special. The where we're set up, you can feel everything. The crowd's unmistakable. We all know about the power of Paulson, but whether it's hot, cold, rain, wind, whatever, being able to feel that is an important part of how we do what we do.
Talk about just talking about the power of Paulson, it's real. And I don't think, most people that aren't, affiliated with Georgia Southern or maybe might be Georgia Southern grads, but not like the biggest football fans, is the power of Paulson. It's such a unique stadium. It's the prettiest little stadium in America, obviously, but you get a pack house, 25 to 30,000 people, whatever it is. I just go back to that Coastal game a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, that was we've seen a lot of electric games in Paulson, but truly, Paulson Stadium, I'm getting chills right now because I just need football season so desperately.
There is one thing that we started doing on pregame at home because when we start, I know we technically have, if it's a 6 o'clock game, we're technically kicking off at 6:03 or 6:05 or whatever. So there's that built-in couple of extra minutes where you still got to set the scene. We'll come on to start the broadcast. We'll take our legal ID since it's the top of the hour, but it never fails when we're back and it's the first Georgia Southern chant of the game. Terry and I don't speak. We let it go for about 10, 15 seconds, just so that can hopefully bleed through to the people that can't be there and are listening to us, whether it's on their phone, computer, or still through the radio. That's something that really tells you, whoa, it's clear, it's crisp, it thumps, and every time you hear it, it feels like it's the first time that you hear it.
Yeah, and I mean that also speaks a lot to, you're a good broadcaster because I feel like some broadcasters just try to talk over that kind of moment and you're really letting, people might not be watching the game, they might be in the on the car, listening to it on the road. And I feel like that it makes a good broadcaster and you do a great job of it of know when to speak and know when not to speak. You got to let the fans feel that moment as well.
Yeah, there's two things that the crowd will tell you. One, when you need to turn it up, but also when you need to turn it down. So if
Yeah.
you need to get amped up for a game changing or a season changing play, no matter what it is, you've got to act like you prepared for it. You got to be ready to bring it. But there's other times, let the fans tell the story. Let it breathe. Don't say a word. You don't need to.
You were talking about, your sheets that you got with all the players, numbers, and all that. Obviously, the Georgia Southern student athletes, but, is let's say, we got Fresno State coming up week one. Is that something that you kind of got to study their roster and be familiar with going into that game? How much prep work does it take going into it?
Probably more on the opponent in a given week than it is Georgia Southern, but we really don't ever, like, I don't shut it down. I'm always looking for things. I'm always aware of what's going on. You might say, oh, it takes a whole week to get ready for a football game, which it does, but you're never not aware of things that are happening, whether it's for Georgia Southern or for its opponent. And for instance, play Kansas State in a couple of years. If I see someone Kansas State, I might file it away. I might want to go back and reference it in a couple of years, or Clemson next year, or whomever it is. Just having a sense of what's going on, being aware, and if you can make a storyline out of it, or there's something you can talk about, maybe a couple years down the line, it might be in 5 minutes. But the week of, it's a lot more of the opposing team because you're going to see them once, and odds are that's going to be the only time if it's non-conference. You might not see them again. Now,
Mhm.
some like with Maine coming up this year, we saw them back in 2019, but that's been 6 years. So odds are, I know we have COVID, I know we have waivers, so there's a chance that maybe somebody that was still there and playing for whatever year, but odds are it's going to be completely different. But at least there's some notes about Maine's history because this will be their fifth time coming to Paulson. It's always been competitive. They've never won a game at Paulson, even though those are some noteworthy games, and we'll get to that whenever we get to that in week four. But with the opponent, you got to act like you have at least enough of a working knowledge on them while not losing the fact that you've got to be an expert on the team that you cover.
Mhm.
I might not spend nearly as much time in a given week on Georgia Southern because I'm seeing these guys every day. I'm talking to coaches every day. It still does take a good bit to get numbers because, well, number one, rosters are changing more than they ever have before. Guys will switch numbers. So for somebody that wore number two one year, now they're wearing 17. I got to get out of the mindset. Well, okay, that's a totally different player. It's mentally, it's acute. You've got to be able to okay, 24 was good, but 25 is now, and this is who he is, and this is what he's wearing. The luxury of Fresno is that since it's the first game, you can put as much into that, but you don't want to get yourself into that sense of security because you're not going to have all that time every game. You might go from a couple of months to get ready for Fresno to, okay, well, in this case, staying out in California for a week, you got to get ready to call a game against USC. You got to work in some prep while we're going to take some time to go see the West Coast since Georgia Southern football's never been out there before. But whomever it is, whether it's Jacksonville State, have not played them in years, playing a Maine team that we haven't seen in 6 years. Conference teams, you can go year over year, but there's a lot that's different, and you've got to act like you know what's going on.
I hate that I'm missing the California trip because I feel like every road trip that I've been on hanging out with you, Terry, Frank, and everybody else. We've had some fun times together, that's for damn sure.
It would just figure that Georgia Southern football's never played a game in California. Now they're going to do it twice in as many weeks to start the season. I don't know if they meant it to be this way, but to play in the Central Valley against a Fresno team that's dealing with a new coaching staff, and then you're taking on one of the most historic brands in all of college athletics in USC. And yeah, there's a lot more to that game than would meet the eye with Coach Helton making his return out there. So we're not going to have a shortage of things to talk about those first two games.
Yeah, talking about Coach Helton, no disrespect in the former coaches, but obviously that year that Helton took over, when he got hired mid-season, I think he came to the BYU game, was kind of his first appearance, at Georgia Southern. Now the excitement's back in Statesboro. Obviously, we went 2 6-6 seasons. He obviously hasn't gotten that bowl game yet, but the excitement truly is back to Statesboro. And I think this year is really when we take that next step. But question for you, what are you kind of most excited about coming into year 4 with Clay Helton?
It's if this is the year and the feeling in that building and with people in town, people involved with the program last year helped that a little bit because if you think about it this way, Georgia Southern had never won 8 games not running some form of the option. So that may have swung some people to, I mean, there's going to be the option diehards and the people that are never going to get on board with it. That's fine. That's their choice. That's whatever. But last year had never happened with a non-option team before. So if it's just enough to say, this was possible. It happened that close to getting to a conference championship game. If James Madison does what they typically do at home, Georgia Southern is going to Lafayette to take on the Cajuns last year. And considering the issues they had down the stretch at quarterback, it's not unreasonable to think that Georgia Southern wouldn't have won the title last year and maybe had a different bowl situation. I know the bowl loss stung, but the extension was in the works. You reward progress. That's exactly what has happened here. And this year, despite as tough as that schedule is out of the gate, it seems like the pieces are in place for this to be special. You've got a returning quarterback for the first time since Shiwartz. It had been year-over-year quarterbacks for 4 in a row. Now it's JC going into the season for the second straight year. It's his third year in the system. You are breaking in a new rotation at running back, even though OJ and Bedinga and Gibbs are back. But Bryce Baker and Teo Todd did more than enough on scout last year to say that they're ready if need be. You've got depth at receiver. You've got size at receiver, which is really attractive. You've got the core of your offensive line back. You've got 2 stud linebackers who will step in. And in the case of Brendan Harrington, that's a cool story. Him coming from App
Yeah.
State to get both sides of Deeper Than Hate, and we'll have to have him on to talk about that later in the season. It looks like a stacked secondary. Alex Smith really developed as a punter from freshman to sophomore. I think he's got a chance to be an All-American by the time things are over with. And this is what gets people excited because they saw a year ago how close it was to getting to a championship game. And I would guess that by the time we get to media day, that the thought is it's either going to be Georgia Southern or James Madison to win the East. And it just so happens that they need each other in the first conference game. So we're going to know pretty early what's up after those 4 non-conference games.
Yeah, we haven't won at JMU in quite a while. I don't know the year, but to kind of change, shifts topics here. But me and you have been on a mission on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it,
Trying.
to get Eric Russell in the Hall of Fame. But one thing that I love that you're doing is you're posting some really like interesting stats on there as well. Where have you been getting all of these stats from?
I got to give Daryl Lynn credit for giving me the nudge to try that because I saw what you guys had done and I'm thinking, okay, the NFF network can say we have bylaws, we have statutes, we have guidelines. They don't want to amend them, whatever, but that doesn't mean you can't keep trying. I know that Jared was adamant about it. Anthony Dasher at Georgia has long been on this as well, and I've had him on our podcast to figure if there's any way that we can change minds. But so I've always been a dork. I love history, I love numbers, and I just thought that because she said you ought to, because I used to do leading into the season 50 days before kickoff.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking, okay, there's got to be a lot of numbers we can find from whether it's Irk's tenure with Georgia Southern or just him, period. But it just so happens that over the last about month or so, there have been enough things that have happened where you can make a number match up. And I know we're coming up on triple digits here fairly soon, and we're running out of games that Irk was here. But it's fun giving people perspective on that, whether they know Georgia Southern or not, because a lot of people have an appreciation for the history of the program, but they may not remember exactly how things happen. And I'm not trying to say I'm an expert or anything, but I love going through old media guides. I love watching his old coaches shows. There's always a nugget or something in there, watching the old games and the ability to clip those out. And I think it stokes people's memories. I remember watching that, or I was there for that game, or I remember playing in that game. It's enough to stir people up because everybody wants to talk about Irk.
Yeah.
But if we can stir it up even more, maybe someone else would look at that and say, maybe there's something I can do to help this out too.
Yeah, you talk about kind of people bringing up memories of the games. You posted something, it was the other day. It was something Donnie Allen scored a game-winning touchdown. Actually, no, Donnie Allen, his kids, I mean, we didn't go to the same school, but from
Yeah.
the same town in Macon. But my dad, he saw that and he was like, "Damn, like I remember this game." And I was like, "Well, yeah, you better." I was like, "You were in the freaking mascot uniform, like you better remember the freaking game."
Got to have a Donnie Allen stat every now and then because there was a wide receiver and there was a defensive lineman. People still, no, there wasn't. Yes, there were two Donnie Allens. So we can say that one did this and one did this. We keep them separate. But I remember because I've tried to watch as many old games as I can. And I remember the Montana game from '89. And when I saw 42-yard catch, I'm thinking, okay, that was the Hail Mary. So I went back and found it. And right at the end of the first half, I can't remember if it was a tip ball or if it just dropped right into him, but that was the moment where Montana realized that they were probably going to head back home instead of do a national championship.
Yeah. But, I don't think, people who are even some Georgia Southern fans my age that, graduated from Georgia Southern, I don't think most people understand how truly special Irk Russell was. And I was like, I had a conversation with my dad. I was like, sometimes I feel like Irk was like this like mythical figure like Santa Claus or something. Like he's just the statue, the history, and what he did in a short amount of time, started from scratch to turn it into a national championship program is truly unbelievable.
There are very few people in any walk, any profession, any way that are universally liked. And I never had the pleasure of meeting Coach.
Mm.
I've I've thankfully I work with somebody in Terry that's a direct connection. I've talked with your dad about him a number of times, and we don't have a ton of connections to Irk anymore. But whether it's talking Georgia fans, Georgia Southern fans, because he did great things with both, I don't know that you will ever find anybody that has a bad word to say about Irk Russell. And we're coming up on 20 years since he's been gone, but the memory is going to endure because there's people still around that revere him and love him the way that they did because of what he did for them.
Yeah, and I think Irk, his birthday is coming up as well.
Yeah.
July 23rd is his
Yeah.
birthday. Irk would be 99 this year. 99, which is crazy to think about. Like
Yeah.
you said, died in 2006, but just the cigar, the iconic cigar picture, the blood on on his forehead, like you can't beat the intensity from the guy. But what I love about what a ton of his former players and like Terry, and we can go down the list of how much of a truly nice individual Irk was as well.
And it's inevitable that something about Irk is going to pop up on a broadcast, and it may be Terry just having a light bulb go on about a random practice in 1988 that he hasn't thought about in years. But that's what gets the emotion out of these guys. It's not that they won national championships. It's not that he was this mean cuss that got the most out of them. It's that he was the most genuine person that they had ever come across, coach or no coach. He was that dude, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, last kind of thing I got for you before we get out of here. Love this conversation, by the way. But last thing I got is what has your favorite, doesn't have to be football. What is your favorite call or favorite thing that you have gotten a call at Georgia Southern?
All
Home
right, I'll,
or away, because obviously, we got the regional hosted in Statesboro, which
yeah.
was amazing. Gotten to beat Nebraska, a lot of big games in Paulson, but you can give a couple. I'm just curious.
I'd hate to narrow it down just because there's so much and everything had a different meaning for when it happened. You brought up the regional and what Ty Fisher did that day against UNCG, taking a perfect game into the sixth inning, throwing a four-hit shutout in a regional that Georgia Southern was hosting. That's one that's in a special class. The App 18 win, the 19 win, the 22 win. Nebraska will always be personally special for me because I grew up a Nebraska football fan. I loved how they ran yeah,
I
I grew
love
up watching Tommy Frazier run the option when I was 8, 9 years old, and I'm still a Nebraska fan a little bit, whatever. I'm not deeply involved with Georgia Southern, so that one was a little bit personal. Basketball wise, the Mark Byington era was special. Being able to say that Tukey Brown's 4 years were my first 4 years calling basketball. He person, player. I don't think there's anything on the floor that he couldn't do. It sucked that they couldn't get all the way, but those teams were so much fun to cover. And I think that Charlie's got a really good thing. It's almost an entirely new roster, but now we've got the beautiful new building. The Hill is going to allow athletics to do so much, not just with basketball, special events, concerts, comedians. Hopefully, down the line, going to be hosting the Eagle Nation Fund event with Mac Brown coming up here in just a couple of weeks, and that'll be a big deal baseball wise. Working with Rodney Hennon is a treat, and he's the same person every day. We've had a lot of main moments. We've sat there on a lot of Saturday nights before Championship Sunday, more than probably deserve. But whatever the moment is, it's the people in the moment that allows the moment to sound the way that it does. We hoot and holler about touchdowns and all that, but knowing that knowing the kind of person that Kyle Van Treese is and how hard he worked and how much he put in to execute that quarterback draw to beat Nebraska, knowing the kind of guy that Darion Anderson was and what he had to go through, a lot of criticism from the outside to make the catch in 18. That's still the loudest I've ever heard Paulson Stadium. His catch in 18 is still louder than I think the 22 walk off
Yeah.
in double overtime. I've never heard that sound at Paulson. I hope I hear it a little bit. It's up with the sound that was made in 18. I've never heard that before. So many games, too many to count at J.I. Clements, going from Hanner to the Hill. I wasn't sure how that was ultimately going to go, but the Hill is going to be an awesome thing. And when that place gets full, it's going to shake people like Hanner did for so long, for 50 plus years. What has made this special, though, is how much everybody works to have success. Nothing is giving to anybody here. If you come here, it's the understanding that you unbutton the sleeves, you roll them up, you get dirty, you get to work, and that's why the wins matter so much more.
Yeah, and I love Coach Helton and all the other coaches on campus have really kind of embraced that blue collar mentality as well. I
Yeah.
know Coach loves to speak on that. But Danny, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast again. Hopefully, we can have your favorite call this year with the conference championship trophy being hoisted again in Statesboro, Georgia.
Well, I've got this thing that if Paulson Stadium hosts a Sun Belt championship game, the Eagles are not going to lose that game. So let's hope that it happens sometime this December.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, it's 11 years in the making since 2014. So hopefully we can get it done this year.
Yeah.
But, hey, thanks again, Danny. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to being back in Statesboro.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Hail Southern.